13 chapters. The most towering argument in the entire New Testament. And not one name on the cover. Nobody knows who wrote the book of Hebrews. Nobody. Not in 2,000 years. 4,000 years ago, on a road outside a city called Salem, a king walked out of nowhere to meet a warrior returning from battle. He brought bread and wine. He spoke a blessing. He took a tithe. Then he vanished. And the Bible never explains who he was. In 1947, a shepherd threw a stone into a cave above the Dead Sea and heard clay break. What he found inside, the Dead Sea Scrolls, included something nobody expected. A scroll dated 100 years before Christ that had already written the name the book of Hebrews would later make famous. For 1,500 years, a curtain hung in the temple, telling the same people the same thing every day. You cannot come in, not yet, not like this. And then, one afternoon, it tore in half, from the top down, and the book of Hebrews explains what that tearing cost. This is the book Hollywood never dared to film. No chariot race, no parted sea, just 13 chapters that explain what every sacrifice, every priest, every curtain in your Bible was always pointing at. Tonight, we read it slow.
I want to tell you something I am not proud of. 14 years I led worship in a Baptist church in Alabama. 14 years. And I never once preached from the book of Hebrews, not one Sunday. I told myself it was too dense, too theological, too hard to make alive for people who drove 45 minutes to sit in a pew on a tired morning. The truth was simpler than that. I had never read it slowly enough to see what was in it. The year was 2019. I had stepped back from the platform. No congregation to feed on Sunday, just me and a kitchen table in Atlanta and a Bible I thought I already knew. I opened Hebrews one Monday morning and I did not get up from the chair for 4 hours, because the book I had avoided for 14 years turned out to be the one that explains what all the others were for. I am going to walk you through all 13 chapters tonight. But I am going to do something the competitor videos do not do. I am going to take you to a cave in the Judean desert, to a scroll found in 1947, dated 100 years before Christ, that was already writing about the central figure of this book before the book ever existed. That is the part nobody talks about. Part 2. The opening shot. Fragments become one voice. Listen to how Hebrews opens, because the first sentence is the establishing shot of the whole film. God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spake in time past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son. Read that again and feel the architecture of it. For 1,000 years, God had spoken in fragments. A word to Abraham under the stars. A burning bush in a desert that had no right to be burning. A still small voice to a prophet sitting under a juniper tree, so exhausted he wanted to die. A vision to Isaiah, so overwhelming it made him cry out that he was undone. Pieces, scattered across the centuries like light through a broken window. And then the camera pulls all the way back, and the fragments become one face. In these last days spoken unto us by his Son. The same hands that shaped the first morning, the text says, now reaching into a manger. And then comes the line the writer uses to introduce him. The Son is the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person. Not a reflection, not a photograph. The brightness of glory, the same way light pours off the sun and is inseparable from the sun itself. Not a copy, the thing itself, radiant. And the express image, that word in the Greek is character, from which we get the English word character. It means the exact stamp, like a royal seal pressed into wax, so precisely that every detail of the seal appears in the impression. The Son is the exact stamp of who God is. I have sat with that claim for years. I still do not think I have reached the bottom of it. But here is what I believe it is doing in this first sentence. It is not starting the letter with an argument. It is starting with a photograph. Before the theology comes, the writer shows you the face. And then he says, now let me show you how high that face ranks. Part 3, better, the word that runs the whole book. There is one word that runs through all 13 chapters like a drumbeat under a long piece of music. Once you hear it, you will never stop hearing it. The word in the Greek is Cretan. Your English Bible translates it better. And the writer reaches for it 13 times across the letter like a hammer driving the same nail from 13 different angles. Better than angels. A better hope. A better covenant. Better promises. A better sacrifice. A better country. A better resurrection. Better things. Now here is the distinction that will save you from misreading the whole book. Cretan is not good versus evil. It is not right versus wrong. It is not light tearing through darkness. It is good versus greater. The old things were not rotten. The law was holy. The priests were ordained by God Himself. The sacrifices were commanded from the mouth of heaven. None of it was a mistake. The writer is not swinging a wrecking ball at the old covenant. He is showing you that a candle is real light. He is also showing you the sun has risen. The shadow was beautiful. The shadow was always pointing at a body. And the writer of Hebrews is about to show you piece by piece, chapter by chapter, what every shadow in the whole Old Testament was casting toward. But before he gets to the shadows and their body, he does something in chapter 1 that stops you cold. He ranks the sun above the angels. To understand why that was not a small thing to write, you have to understand who the angels were to the first readers of this letter. To the Hebrews, angels were the highest beings in the created order, messengers of fire, the hosts surrounding the throne, the ones their own tradition said had delivered the law to Moses on the mountain. The most powerful beings their imagination could reach to. And the writer says without blinking, the sun is higher. He even quotes the moment that proves it. And again, when he bringeth in the first begotten into the world, he saith, and let all the angels of God worship him, not stand beside him, not salute him as the greatest among their own. They bow. The finest beings in heaven are on their faces before this one. I have read that verse on quiet nights and felt the weight of it settle on me. Because if the highest beings in heaven are prostrate, then what is walking in through that door is in a category that has no second member. Part 4, Chapter 2, The Drift and the Descent. The writer lifts the sun to the top of heaven in Chapter 1. And the moment he does, he turns and looks you directly in the eye. Chapter 2 opens not with more theology. It opens with a warning, and it is the gentlest and most terrifying warning in the whole letter. Therefore, we ought to give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest at any time we should let them slip. Let them slip. He does not say, lest someone come and rip the truth out of your hands. He does not say, lest an enemy attack what you believe. He says, lest it slip, quietly. The way a boat drifts from a dock when nobody is holding the rope. Not a dramatic departure, a slow, unconscious separation. That image has sat with me longer than almost any verse in this book, because I know how it happens. Nobody decides to walk away from God on a Tuesday morning. It is slower than that. A missed prayer, a heart that goes a little colder in January and never quite warms back up. A truth you once trembled at that has become over years just background noise. And then one morning you look up and the shore is further away than you knew. The writer had watched it happen to people he loved. So he asks the question that hangs over the whole letter. How shall we escape if we neglect so great salvation? Not attack, not curse, not reject, neglect. If we simply do nothing, if we treat the greatest rescue in human history as small. And then he does something tender. He shows you why the rescue is so great. He says of the Son that he was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death. Stop and feel the shape of that. The one the angels worship in chapter 1 steps down below them in chapter 2. The brightness of God's glory wraps himself in skin that bleeds and tires and hungers and grieves. He went low, all the way down into death. And on the other side, the writer says, he was crowned, glory and honor. The descent was not the defeat. The descent was the door to the crown. Part 5. Chapter 3. Greater than Moses, the kindest comparison. Chapter 3 brings in the name that would have made every original reader sit forward in their seat: Moses. To the Hebrews, there was no human being higher than Moses. He spoke to God face to face, the only man in Scripture who could claim that. He brought down the law carved by the finger of God. He led an entire nation out of the oldest empire on earth. His name was not just a name, it was the whole weight of what Israel was. The writer does not insult him for a single breath. He says Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant. Faithful, honored, a trusted man in the household of God. He gives Moses his full glory first, and then he lifts the Son one step higher. But Christ as a son over his own house. Feel the difference. A servant is faithful in the house. A son is faithful over the house. The servant serves in a home that belongs to someone else. The son's name is on the deed. It is not less and more in worth. It is servant and son in role. The same drum from chapter 1, played in a new key, better than angels. And now, carefully, gently, but without flinching, greater than Moses. And having said that, the writer pleads with us. Today, if ye will hear his voice, harden not your hearts. The danger is never that the Son is too small to be worth the attention. The danger is always that our hearts grow too hard to hear him. Part 6. Chapter 4, the rest that still remains. Chapter 4 is the one I come back to when I am tired in a way sleep does not touch. The wilderness generation hardened their hearts and never entered the land. They saw the pillar of fire and the parted water. They ate bread that fell from a cloudless sky. And still their hearts calcified around their own fear. They wandered in that desert until they died in the sand. A whole generation that witnessed miracles and could not rest. And the writer looks at that old tragedy and says something that stopped me completely the first time I read it slowly. There remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God. Remaineth, present tense, still on the table. Not spent on Joshua's generation, not used up in Canaan, still waiting right now for anyone tired enough to want it. Most of us were taught that this rest was a Sabbath day, one day a week, put down the work, go to church, pick it back up on Monday. The writer is reaching for something much deeper than a calendar entry. He says we enter into rest the way God himself rested after creation, not collapsing from exhaustion, resting because the work was finished and it was good. That is the rest he is pointing at. A rest where you finally stop trying to earn what was already given to you. The difference between working for God and working from the peace he already gave you. I think about the people carrying things that have no earthly resolution, a grief that has no conclusion, a wait for a door God has not opened in years, a weariness that sits in the bones rather than the body. The rest that remains is not a vacation from your life. It is the deep breath of a soul that has stopped striving and started trusting the one who said the work was finished. Part 7. The Living Word and the Merciful Priest. And then, in the same chapter, almost in the same breath, the writer picks up an image so sharp it has unnerved readers for 2,000 years. For the Word of God is quick and powerful, and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit, and of the joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. Quick means alive, not a dead book on a shelf, historical, finished, handled with curator's gloves, living, and sharper than any blade a soldier ever carried. Two edges so fine it passes between things we believed could never be separated, soul and spirit, joint and marrow. The places where you have hidden things even from yourself, this word goes in there. It does not stop at your behavior. It reads the thoughts. It reads the intents. It reads the why underneath the what. Here is what has always stopped me about that verse. We sit down with the page thinking we are the ones doing the studying. And somewhere in the middle of a verse, you realize the page has been reading you. Every motive you dressed up, every excuse you rehearsed, every fear you named something prettier, the living word cuts straight to it. And the moment the writer shows you a word that cuts that deep, he does the most merciful thing in the whole letter. He gives you a priest who understands. Seeing then that we have a great high priest that is passed into the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our profession. For we have not an high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities. Read that twice. He is not a priest who cannot be touched. He can be touched by the exact thing you are ashamed of: the hunger, the exhaustion, the night you did not know how to make it to morning. He knows the feeling not as theory, not as an idea he studied from above, but from the inside. And he was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. I used to think that gap, the yet without sin, made him distant from me, that because he never fell, he could not understand the falling. It took me years to see I had it exactly backward. He felt temptation more completely than I ever have, because he never gave in to relieve the pressure. I relieved the pressure eventually. He carried it all the way through. So what do you do with a priest like that? The writer tells you, let us come boldly unto the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Boldly, not crawling, not begging at the back door. Boldly, the way a child walks into a father's room, because the one sitting on that throne has felt everything you feel. Part 8. Melchizedek. Now we go deeper than any version you have seen. Now, this is the part of the letter the competitor videos always handle the same way. They tell you about Melchizedek, the mysterious king, no father, no mother, the bread and wine, Abraham's tithe, and then they move on. I am not going to do that. Because in 1947, in Cave 11 at Qumran above the Dead Sea, shepherds and then archaeologists found something that changes how you read every line of Hebrews chapter 7. A scroll, fragmentary, written in Hebrew, dated by scholars to approximately 100 years before Christ. The academics call it 11Q13, the Melchizedek Document, before the book of Hebrews was ever written, before the writer of Hebrews ever put stylus to papyrus. This scroll had already built a theology around the name Melchizedek that should make your hair stand up. Let me show you what it says. The 11Q13 scroll is an apocalyptic commentary on the Jubilee year of Leviticus 25. the same passage we examined when we walked through Azazel and the Day of Atonement. And its central claim is this: at the final Day of Atonement, at the end of the 10th Jubilee period, a figure will come who will atone for the sins of the righteous, execute judgment on Belial and the forces of darkness, and deliver the sons of light. That figure's name in the scroll is Melchizedek. The text calls him Elohim, the same Hebrew word used for God. It substitutes his name for the most holy name of Israel's God in a quotation from Isaiah. It says he will preside over the divine council and judge both the righteous and the wicked. It portrays him not as a human king in Canaan, but as a celestial high priest, a divine intermediary, a heavenly figure who leads the armies of light against the armies of darkness on the final day. This scroll was written a century before Christ, a century before the writer of Hebrews called Jesus a high priest after the order of Melchizedek, and said he ever liveth to make intercession. Think about what that means. When the original Jewish readers of Hebrews heard the name Melchizedek, they were not hearing the name of a minor character from one scene in Genesis. Some of them were hearing the name of the expected deliverer, the one the scrolls said would come on the final Day of Atonement, the one who would bear the Elohim title, the one who would judge the darkness and free the sons of light. And the writer of Hebrews is saying, he has come. He is here. And his name is Jesus. I find that almost impossible to walk past quickly. Part 9, back to Genesis, the desert road, and the strange king. Now let me take you back to the scene the writer keeps pointing at, all the way back to Genesis 14. Because you need to feel this scene in order to feel what Hebrews does with it. Abraham has just come home from war. He chased the kings who kidnapped his nephew Lot. He won against odds nobody would have bet on. And now he is walking back, exhausted, covered in the dust of 4 different kingdoms, with the rescued and the spoils in tow. And out of the desert, out of a city we barely know, a figure comes to meet him. The text says it with the simplicity that belongs only to things too large to be dressed up. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. Stop there. This is before the law of Moses, before there was a single Levite priest, before there was an Israel, before a temple existed anywhere. And here is a man already called the priest of the Most High God, the same God Abraham served. 2 men from completely different worlds, worshiping the same Lord on a dusty road outside a city that would one day become Jerusalem. Where did this king come from? Who ordained him? Who were his parents? The story does not say. He simply appears. And the appearing is the whole point. Then Melchizedek does 2 things, and both of them thunder through the New Testament. First, he blesses Abraham, the greatest patriarch in Hebrew memory, the man God personally chose to father a whole nation. He receives a blessing from this king who walked in from nowhere. And second, Abraham gives him 1/10 of everything, the tithe. The father of the faithful, with the plunder of kings in his hands, counts out 1/10 and hands it to this figure. The greater receives from the lesser. That is the hinge the writer of Hebrews will carry into chapter 7. And the Bible gives us genealogies for everyone, exhaustive lists. So-and-so begat so-and-so, pages of them. But for Melchizedek, nothing. No father, no mother, no birth record, no death record. He appears, he blesses, he receives. The page closes. I used to read past that silence in a single breath. It was 2020 during the lockdown, sitting alone in Atlanta, no congregation to lead. that I finally stopped on that absence and stayed with it. Why does everyone in Genesis have a paragraph, and this one king has a sentence with no family tree? I came to believe the missing genealogy is not an accident. The silence is the sermon. The Spirit left the gaps on purpose, so that one day a figure could be described who needed no beginning recorded, because his beginning was not a beginning. Part 10, Chapter 7, The Name Unpacked. Now the writer of Hebrews picks up that desert scene and begins to pull it apart like a man unfolding a letter he has read 100 times. And the first thing he does is translate the name. He says, first being by interpretation King of Righteousness, and after that, also King of Salem, which is King of Peace. The name itself is a sermon. Melchizedek breaks into two Hebrew words, Melchi meaning king, and Zedek meaning righteousness. So he is by his very name the King of Righteousness. That is who he is before he speaks a word or performs a single act. Righteousness is built into the name. Then the second layer, King of Salem. And Salem, the writer tells you, means peace. So you have a king of righteousness who is also a king of peace. And the writer is doing this slowly on purpose, because he wants you to feel the order. Righteousness first, then peace. You cannot have real peace until things are made right. That is not a coincidence of language. That is a pattern God planted in a name 4,000 years ago, waiting for someone to read it in the right light. And then the detail that gives me chills every time. Salem. That small city Melchizedek ruled. Let that word grow. Salem becomes, in time, Jerusalem, the city of peace. The same ground where the temple would rise, where the sacrifices would smoke for 1,000 years, where the deepest drama of redemption would one day play out on a hill called the Skull. The writer is showing you that this mysterious king, who appeared to Abraham with bread and wine, was already ruling the city of peace before it ever had its full name. And now the verse, the one that has divided faithful readers for 2,000 years, without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth a priest continually. Who talks like that about a man? Let me lay out the two honest readings, because I will not hand you one and hide the other. The first, Melchizedek was himself a pre-incarnate, appearing of Christ in the Old Testament, appearing before Bethlehem, before Nazareth, before the cross. The language is so otherworldly, no beginning of days, no end of life, that many careful readers have believed the only explanation is that this was Christ himself in an earlier form. The second, the one I have slowly come to lean toward, though I hold it with an open hand, looks at the exact words. The writer does not say Melchizedek was the Son of God. He says he was made like unto the Son of God, like unto, a resemblance, a shadow cast forward. And remember the silence in Genesis, the missing family tree. Many careful readers believe the point is not that this king literally had no parents, but that Scripture deliberately omitted them, so that on the page, in the permanent record, he stands without recorded beginning and without recorded end. The silence makes him a living picture of a priesthood that never dies. I will not resolve what the church has not resolved in 2,000 years. Both readings arrive at the same place. A priesthood pictured here that does not pass away, that abideth continually. And that is the door the writer walks you through next. Part 11, the proof. Even Levi bowed. The writer does not leave it to feeling. He builds it like a legal case. Consider how great this man was, unto whom even the patriarch Abraham gave the 10th of the spoils. Stop on that word even Abraham. The man God pulled out of Ur of the Chaldees and made the root of a whole nation. When that man came home from battle with the plunder of kings, he counted out a tenth and handed it to Melchizedek. The greater receives from the lesser, and without all contradiction, the less is blessed of the better. One of those lines you could slide over in a second, but sit with it. When Melchizedek blessed Abraham, the blessing flowed downhill, from the greater to the lesser. In that single moment on that dusty road, Abraham, the towering patriarch, is the smaller man in the room. Then comes the move that the first time I read it, I had to set the Bible down. The writer says that in a sense, Levi paid tithes through Abraham. Levi, the father of the whole priestly tribe of Israel, the line of Aaron that would run the temple for centuries, while Levi was still unborn, still waiting generations in the body of his ancestor Abraham, he already bowed to this king. The entire Levitical priesthood, in the body of Abraham, paid tithes to Melchizedek. The lesser priesthood bowed to the greater. So there is a priesthood older and higher than the one Israel knew. And because Jesus holds that priesthood, the writer brings it home with the verse I believe is the beating heart of the entire book. Wherefore he is able also to save them to the uttermost that come unto God by him. Seeing he ever liveth to make intercession for them, he ever liveth to make intercession for you. I want to be careful here because I do not want to trample holy ground with too many of my own words. But let me say it plainly, the way I would say it at a kitchen table. There is someone praying for you right now who never stops, who never sleeps, who never runs out of words, whose prayers on your behalf did not start this morning and will not end tonight. He ever liveth, present tense, continuous. He is making intercession while you read this sentence. I have sat with that on hard nights. I do not claim to have fully understood it. I do not think anyone fully has. Some mysteries are not puzzles to be solved. They are doors to be walked through with your shoes off. Part 12. The Better Covenant. Law on stone versus law on hearts. A priest serves a covenant. He stands between God and the people on the terms of an agreement. And the writer makes his next great move here. This priest, he says, did not come to patch up the old agreement. He came with a new one. Jesus has obtained a more excellent ministry by how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. For years, I heard the word covenant and felt nothing. It sounded like legal terminology, fine print on a contract nobody actually reads. It was during those 4 years I spent reading alone, away from the platform, that the word finally got under my skin. A covenant is not fine print. A covenant is the deepest promise two parties can make, sealed in blood, designed to hold when everything else breaks down. When God cuts a new one, something has shifted in how God and his people stand together. And what makes the new one better? Listen to the words God speaks through the prophet Jeremiah, quoted right here in Hebrews. I will put my laws into their mind and write them in their hearts. Not on tablets of cold stone, set outside the people, something they looked at from a distance and tried to reach from the outside in. On hearts. In the soft place where you actually live. The old said, here is what is right. Now reach for it. The new says, I will put it inside you and grow it from within. That is the whole difference. Not moral instruction from the outside. Transformation from the inside. I believe that is the most under-preached idea in the whole letter. Part 13. The tabernacle was a shadow. Every board was pointing. Now the writer turns to the tabernacle, the tent of worship in the wilderness. And he makes a claim about that holy tent that changes how you read every page of the Old Testament. The priests of Israel served at a sanctuary that was only a copy. His exact words, they serve unto the example and shadow of heavenly things. the example and shadow. Picture a shadow on the ground. It has the shape of the real thing, the outline, the proportions. But it is not the thing itself. The writer is saying that the whole earthly tabernacle, every board, every curtain, every golden vessel, every piece of furniture in that sacred tent was the shadow of a greater sanctuary in heaven. Think about what that does to every scene in the Old Testament set in the tabernacle. The outer court, under the desert sun. The thick embroidered veil hanging heavy across the entrance to the innermost room. Blue and purple and scarlet, cherubim worked into the fabric. And behind that veil, the Holy of Holies. The small, dark chamber where the ark sat, where the glory descended, where only the high priest could enter, and only once a year, and never without blood. For centuries, that veil told the same story to the same people every single day. You cannot come in. Not yet. Not like this. You are not clean enough. The account is not settled. And the writer says, all of it was a shadow pointing at something real. Then he names the real thing. Christ came as an high priest of good things to come by a greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands. The true sanctuary, the heavenly one, that the wilderness tent was only ever sketching in shadow. I have come to read the entire Old Testament differently because of this one idea. Every shadow has a body that casts it, and you do not understand the shadow fully until you have seen the body. Part 14. The blood that does not need repeating. Picture the high priest year after year, walking behind that veil with a basin of blood, the blood of a bull, the blood of a goat. He sprinkles it on the mercy seat. He backs out. The veil falls closed, and the people breathe again for one more year. And then the next year he does it again. And the year after that. Have you ever stopped and asked why he had to keep coming back? The writer of Hebrews asks it for you, and his answer is one of the most piercing sentences in the New Testament. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sins. Not possible. I think we read right past how stunning that is because we have heard it so many times. The writer is saying that 500 years of animal sacrifice, the whole system God himself commanded, running on blood day after day, festival after festival, morning and evening, none of it, not one drop, could actually lift the guilt off a single soul. So what was it for? Here is how I understand it after sitting with this long enough. The animal blood was never the cure. It was the reminder. It kept saying over and over, something real has to die for this. But not this. Not yet. This is only the shadow. And the reason it had to be repeated every year was itself the proof that the debt was not paid. If the debt were paid, the writer says, the bill would stop coming. The fact that the priest walked back behind that veil every single year was Scripture's own way of telling Israel, the work is not finished. And then the writer lifts your eyes from the bulls and the goats to the cross. Neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood, he entered in once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us. By his own blood, once. Not every year, once. Not into the tent in the wilderness, but into the true sanctuary, the heavenly one. Eternal redemption. Not a one-year covering that expires when the calendar turns. A redemption that holds forever. And then the line that I believe is the final answer to every question the book has been asking. We are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. Once for all. 3 words that close a 1,500-year account. Not once for some. Not once for the righteous. Once for all. The work that the blood of animals could never finish. Finished. Part 15. The Torn Veil. The whole book in one image. And now the writer takes everything he has built, the better priest, the better covenant, the better sacrifice, the heavenly sanctuary, and turns it all into an open door. Having therefore, brethren, boldness to enter into the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which he hath consecrated for us, through the veil, that is to say, his flesh. Boldness to enter the holiest place, the room behind the veil that was sealed your entire life. Scripture is now telling you that you may walk in, not the priest for you once a year, you, with boldness. And do you remember what happened to that actual veil? On the day Jesus died, the Gospels tell us the great temple curtain tore from top to bottom, not from the bottom up, not a man reaching as high as he could and pulling. From the top down, a hand reaching down. The door God had kept shut, God himself threw open. That is the whole book of Hebrews in a single image. The closed becomes the open. The barred becomes the welcome. The priest who trembled alone behind the curtain is replaced by every soul who has the boldness to come. I have read that moment 100 times, and it still steadies me on my hardest days. Part 16. Chapter 11. The Hall of Faith and the Unlikely Ones. Before the writer shows you the great cloud of witnesses, he stops and defines the word. He tells you exactly what he means by faith, so that when the names start coming, you understand what every one of them had in common. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Substance. Evidence. Those are not soft words. Those are words you use in a courtroom, words that carry weight. Faith, he says, is not a wish floating in the air. It is the substance, the solid ground under something you are still hoping for. It is the evidence, the proof you hold in your hand of something your eyes have not yet arrived at. We have been treating faith like a feeling. The writer treats it like a foundation. And from this point forward, the word pistis carries the whole letter home. The writer has spent 10 chapters showing you a better high priest. Now he asks the only question that matters once you have seen him. How do you lay hold of all of that? By faith, not by performance, not by perfection, by trust in the one who was better all along. Now the camera starts moving through a gallery. Abel, by faith, his offering pleased God. And then the line that has always stopped me cold. Abel, being dead, yet speaketh. The first man to die for his worship, murdered by his own brother. And thousands of years later, his faith still has a voice that death could not silence. Enoch, by faith, translated that he should not see death. He walked with God so closely and so faithfully that one day God simply took him. His whole legacy, not what he built or conquered, but that he pleased God. I think the older most of us get, the more we want that to be our legacy, not the noise, the walk. Noah, by faith, being warned of God of things not seen as yet, prepared an ark, things not seen as yet. He built a massive vessel on dry ground under a clear sky for a flood that had not come, and that nobody around him believed was coming. He swung the hammer before the first drop fell. That is the substance of things hoped for. That is faith in motion. Abraham, by faith, when he was called to go out, obeyed. And he went out not knowing whither he went, not knowing. God said, go. Abraham went. He did not know the address. No map, no destination. Just a voice, a promise, and a pair of feet willing to move. Most of us want the whole plan before we take the first step. Abraham took the first step with no plan but God. And then the writer says the tender thing. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off. They never held the thing in their hands. They saw it from a distance and kept walking toward it. Strangers and pilgrims on the earth. That phrase has carried a weight in the black church that most commentaries do not capture. People never fully at home in the country they were living in, holding on to a homeland they could only see by faith. The writer says that is not tragedy. That is the very shape of faith itself. Moses, by faith, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He could have kept the palace, stayed an Egyptian prince, stayed comfortable. Instead, he chose affliction with his own suffering people over pleasures that would not last. Why would a man do that? The writer tells us. He endured as seeing him who is invisible. An invisible God was more real to Moses than the visible throne he walked away from. And then Rahab, a foreign woman, a woman with a past the text does not conceal. Living in a city marked for judgment, and here she stands in the hall of faith right beside Abraham and Moses. I have to be honest with you about Rahab, because I went back and forth on whether to even stop here. For most of my life, the years I led worship, I read these faith chapters as a list of spiritual giants, people built different than me. Rahab did not fit that category, so I slid past her. It took me a long time, somewhere in those 4 years alone after I left the church, to see what I had been missing. The writer does not put polished people in this chapter, he puts the unlikely ones. A murdered younger brother, an old man with no map, a prince who threw away a palace, a woman the town would have whispered about. And I sat with that one night, and something in me came undone. I had been measuring faith by respectability. God measures it by trust. I used to think this chapter was about being impressive. I now think it is about being willing. That is a completely different thing, and it changed how I read my own life. Part 17, the great cloud and the race that is set, wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight, and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. A cloud of witnesses. Picture the stadium, the track running through the middle. You, the runner, down on that track. And rising up all around you, filling every seat, the gallery of the faithful who already ran. Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Rahab. All of them watching, none of them quit. They surround you like proof that it can be done. And what the writer tells the runner to do is specific. Lay aside the weight, not the sin alone. The weight. The burden that is not even sin, just heavy. The thing you have been carrying so long, you forgot it was optional to set it down. Lay it aside, and then run. Not sprint, not collapse. Run with patience. The Greek there means endurance, the long, steady run that does not flash brilliant and burnout, but covers the ground mile after mile. He is talking to people who have been running a long time and are tired. Maybe that is you. Maybe you have been on this track 60 or 70 years and your legs are heavier than they were. The writer says, lift your eyes, you are not running alone. And then he gives you the one instruction that holds the whole book. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Not at the crowd in the stands, not at the distance left to run, not even at the heroes of chapter 11. At him. The eyes come off everything else and rest on one face. The author, the one who writes the first line of your faith, who began it before you ever laced up. The finisher, the one who carries it all the way to the last page, who crosses the line and makes sure you cross it too. He does not start your faith and leave you to manage it. He finishes what he starts. That right there is the difference between religion and the gospel. Religion says start well. The gospel says the one who started it will also finish it. And let me say a word to those who have been running a long time. If you are in your later years and the runway feels mostly used up, hear this. The writer does not measure the race by how fast you started. He measures it by whether you are still looking at Jesus near the end. All those years of walking, all those seasons of waiting and serving and quietly keeping the faith when nobody was watching and there was no reward visible, that was never the warm-up. That was the race. And the finish line is not behind you. Part 18, the anchor verse. The same yesterday, today, forever. Near the very end of the letter, the writer hands you one verse to carry out the door. An anchor verse. The kind you grip when everything around you is shaking. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday and today and forever. 3 words for time. One unchanging person standing over all of them. We are living through years when almost nothing stays the same. The ground keeps shifting. Institutions you trusted change. The people around you change. Your own body changes. The world your grandchildren are growing up in barely looks like the one you knew. The writer, writing to people whose whole world was about to be shaken to the foundation, hands them this. The God you are looking at does not change. The same high priest who walked into the true holy place with his own blood is the same today. The same one who prayed for you last year is praying for you tonight. The same one who was there when everything in your life broke apart is the same one standing in what comes next. I have come to believe that one verse can hold a shaking generation steady if they will lean their full weight on it. Part 19. The unsigned letter. The mystery that proves the message. There is one mystery I owe you before we close, because I promised you the truth, and not just the comfortable parts. We have walked 13 chapters together, and to this day, nobody can tell you with certainty who wrote them. Think about that. The most magnificent letter in the New Testament, and there is no name at the bottom. For centuries, many believed it was Paul. You will still find Bibles that print his name above chapter 1. Others have looked at the polished Greek, so different from Paul's other letters, and proposed Apollos, the eloquent preacher from Alexandria, or Barnabas or Priscilla, or someone whose name is simply lost. I have read good, faithful people argue every one of those positions. I am not going to pretend I have settled what the church has not settled in 2,000 years. The honest answer is, we do not know. And here is what moves me about that. The one letter in the New Testament that argues nobody is greater than Jesus, the letter that lifts him above prophets and angels and Moses and every priest who ever put blood on the mercy seat, is the one letter that refuses to put a human name on its own cover. The unsigned letter outlived every guess about who signed it. The argument was always bigger than the author. Maybe that is exactly how it was meant to be. The book that says, "Look unto Jesus, not at anyone else," will not let you look at the man who wrote it either. Here's where I want to leave you. And every word of this is honest. I avoided the book of Hebrews for 14 years. 14 years on a platform with a Bible in my hand, and I skipped the book that explains what every other book was building toward. That is not something I say to impress you with my humility. I say it because I think a lot of people are doing the same thing right now, skipping the dense chapter, skipping the hard letter, getting to the stories, and leaving the theology on the shelf. So here are the 3 things I want you to carry out of tonight. First, every shadow in the Old Testament was pointing at a body. The priest in his robes was a shadow. The tabernacle in the wilderness was a shadow. The lamb on the altar with the knife coming down was a shadow. And a shadow always means a body is nearby casting it. Once you understand that, you will never read the first half of your Bible the same way again. Every ritual, every sacrifice, every priest, they were all saying the same thing. Something real is coming. Something real has come. Second, the Melchizedek who appeared to Abraham on that dusty road was not an accident in the text. The Dead Sea Scroll 11Q13, written 100 years before Christ, had already built a theology around that name. Melchizedek as the celestial high priest who would come on the final day of atonement to deliver the sons of light. When the writer of Hebrews calls Jesus a priest after the order of Melchizedek, he is not reaching for an obscure reference. He is making the claim that the expected deliverer of the 11Q13 scroll has arrived. If your tradition never told you that, go find 11Q13 for yourself. Read it slowly. And then read Hebrews 7 again. Third, the rest still remains. That is not a metaphor. The writer is not speaking poetry. There is a rest, a deep, bone-level, soul-level rest that is still on the table for anyone tired enough to want it. Not a rest that means your circumstances get easier. A rest where you stop trying to earn what was already given and start living from the peace that was already sealed. If you are carrying something tonight that has no earthly resolution, if you are tired in a way that sleep does not touch, hear the writer of Hebrews say it plainly. There remaineth a rest to the people of God. Open the book tonight. Read it slow. Not the way you read a commentary, the way you sit with a letter from someone who has seen everything you are facing and is trying to tell you the one thing you need to hear. The author and finisher of your faith is not done with your story, not even close.